But in the family of the higher cognitive faculties, there is a middle term between the understanding and the reason. This is the judgment, of which we have cause for supposing, according to analogy, that it may contain in itself, if not a special legislation, yet a special principle of its own to be sought according to laws, so merely subjective a priori. This principle, even if it have no field of objects as its realm, yet may have somewhere a territory, with a certain character, for which no other principle can be valid. Immanuel Kant. For Kant, our thinking faculty is divided into three parts: the intellect, the power of judgment, and reason. And I've now spent quite a lot of time in the last couple of lectures talking about the intellect. The intellect being the faculty of rules or of concepts, of general representations, the faculty that brings synthetic unity into the manifold. And I explained how it does so in 3 steps. That is apperception, combining the manifold representations we have and synthesizing them as being my representations, as belonging to one and the same logical subject, which always stays one and the same even when the representations change, and thereby first creating that subject, first making the I. Then I said there is apprehension, which is not done by the intellect directly, but rather by the power of imagination, but under the influence, you could say, of the intellect, because here the power of imagination brings synthetic unity into the manifold of the sense impressions. And by apprehending the various sensations we have, by taking them up into itself, into the power of imagination, it makes it possible for them to become an actual image and to become an actual perception. Without this, we would have a chaos of sense impressions, but not a real perception that we could make sense of. Well, and then this making sense of is the third step. That one you could call intellection. That is the intellect as the faculty of concepts, applying its concepts to the perceptions, and thereby turning them into actual cognitions, thereby making us understand what it is we are perceiving. And that is also how we make experience, by connecting through our intellect several perceptions and understanding them to be necessarily connected, to be part of one and the same system of experience. Well, now it is time to turn to the power of judgment, which to Kant is sort of the middle faculty between the intellect and reason, which is also why it fits to talk about it second. And this power of judgment, of course, does just what the name suggests. It judges, it makes judgments. And the judgment to Kant is the representation of a unity of representations or of concepts. So when I make the judgment, for example, that humans are mammals or dogs are mammals, then that means I, in my mind, have this representation that there is a unity between the concept of human being or of dog and the concept of mammal. As I previously said, it is the intellect which is the faculty of concepts, that is, of thinking general representations, thinking rules that may apply to many individual cases. So in the concept of mammal, I think a rule. I think that as a rule, all mammals give milk to their young, for example. But now it is the power of judgment which applies these rules, which says that yes, this being here, this dog or this human, this falls under this rule. This is a mammal. Kant says that all concepts are just predicates to possible judgments, right? So if I have the concept of a mammal or of a bird, then I can use that in a possible judgment as a predicate, because all judgments, as I previously explained, are about a subject about which I'm making the judgment, and then a predicate which I say belongs or doesn't belong to the subject, right? So I say Kant is a philosopher, or the human being is a mammal, or humans are not birds. So the concepts of philosopher or of mammal or of bird, concepts that mean certain rules, those, when I have them, are possible predicates for possible judgments, and now the power of judgment can use them in its judgments. Actually, the concepts themselves, Kant says, are judgments, because a concept as a general representation, of course, contains a manifold. It is itself a synthetic unity of a manifold, and the concept will contain other concepts or other representations. So in the concept of mammal, there is contained the concept of animal, for example, because all mammals are animals. And there is contained the concept of milk, because I'm saying mammals are a special kind of animals that gives milk to its young. That is the rule I'm thinking here. So the concept itself is a judgment, or is the product of a judgment. That's exactly why when you list all the functions of judgments we have, so I talked about this in the lecture on the table of judgments. Kant says we have 12 different ways of judging, of making connections, of creating synthetic unity. That means you get 12, so to say, products of these 12 judgments, 12 concepts coming out of these ways in which we can judge. And those are the 12 categories, of course, about which I already talked. So, in a way, and Kant says as much at some point, all thinking is judging. And here I want to stress that the whole thinking faculty, it is in the end one. So when Kant says that it is intellect, power of judgment, and reason, he's not really saying that those are three completely different parts, and I don't know, maybe they are in completely different areas of the brain or whatever. Rather, they are three different ways in which we can think, or in which we can use our thinking. But in the end, it is one thinking faculty which is at work here. So, I mean, that is exactly why the whole is sometimes called the intellect, or in some other fewer times reason by Kant, because really those are one in the end. So you could say that all our thinking is judgment, and you could say that what the power of judgment really is it is an applied intellect. It is intellect with its rules, with its general concepts, being applied to singular individual cases. It is therefore also the power of judgment which connects the intellect with sensuality. Because, as I explained in previous lectures, the intellect, with its rules, with its concepts, gives us general representations, and sensuality, which means in our case, as human beings, viewing, intuition, sensual viewing gives us singular representations, so individual cases. So like I can see a specific dog that is sensual, and I will see this specific dog with some specific attributes, like he will have a certain height and he will have a certain color of his fur. And on the other hand, when I, with my intellect, think dog, the concept of dog, what is dogness, what does it mean to be a dog, then I will think of certain general rules. For example, all dogs are mammals. But other specific things will not be contained in that. For example, the color. A dog as such doesn't have a specific color. Whether it's brown or black or white or gray doesn't change it being a dog. So with the intellect, I have a general representation. With sensuality, I have a specific, a singular representation. And now the power of judgment is what connects them both by applying the general representation to the singular one, by applying the rule to the individual case, or subsuming the individual case under the rule, because the judgment will be that yes, this in front of me, this animal is indeed a dog, and it is not a cat or a bird or a fish or whatever. This is also why, according to Kant, all error is really an error of the power of judgment. I already talked about the topic of error and how Kant explains how it is even possible to go wrong. I already explained that in the lecture on Kant's critical method, and there I talked in more general terms. I said that to Kant, error is not in sensuality; it comes from our thinking. But now I can say more specifically that yes, it comes from our thinking, but not from the intellect and not from reason as such, but rather from the power of judgment. Because all errors are really errors of judgment. Kant stresses that the intellect, which is just a faculty of rules, of concepts, the intellect as such cannot go wrong. There are no wrong concepts. I mean, maybe you could say that a concept that contradicts itself and therefore is impossible, like the concept of a circle with angles, or of a four-angled triangle, that they are wrong concepts. But apart from that, you can't really say there are wrong concepts as such, because there can't be a wrong rule. There can only be a rule that is wrongly applied. Like if I play chess and I take the king and I go several fields with it, as if it was the queen, then I'm playing by a rule which in itself is not a wrong rule. I mean, you could come up with a game that was somewhat similar to chess, but where the king could go more than just one step. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It is just that here, in this game, when playing chess, then this rule is not in place. I should not play by this rule. This would be wrong. So maybe I misjudged what game I'm playing. Or you could also say this about any other game. When you are playing football and then you take up the ball with your hand and you throw it, you are playing by a rule which in itself is not a wrong rule. Like, you can't play a game where you can throw a ball with your hand. I mean, there are such games. There's such a game as handball. It is just that here, when you are playing football, you misjudged. When you were thinking that you could do this, that this was within the rules. Here, you should have played by other rules. And this is very important to understand, because this applies to everything. Even concepts that may seem very wrong for us are not wrong as such. That is, as concepts. Like, you can, of course, have superstitious concepts. You can believe that a black cat will bring bad luck, or a broken mirror will bring bad luck. But as a rule, this is neither true nor false. I could think of such a rule of, for example, broken mirrors meaning bad luck. There is no inherent reason why that couldn't be a rule. It doesn't contradict itself. I could think of a world where this is the case. I can maybe make up such a world if I'm writing a fantasy novel. It is just that here, in this world I'm actually living in, here this rule is not in place. So it is not the concept that is wrong if I'm superstitious. It is just that I was wrong in my judgment, in believing that this concept applies here. Or anywhere in the world for that matter. The same you could say about racism, for example. When a racist has a concept about a certain group of people, like the Jews or the black people or whatever, then that racist will not have a wrong concept as such, because his concept may contain that this group of people is somehow subhuman, is somehow worse and worthless than his kind. And as a concept, that is not wrong as such. I mean, I could think of a group of people that are somehow worse. And once again, I could in theory live in such a world. And I could make up such a world. I could write such a fantasy novel. It is just that if I apply this concept, this rule, to these actual people, like the Jews or the black people or whoever, then I'm making a wrong judgment. Just like if I thought of certain people in terms of a thing that does exist, like here I'm talking about a concept of some subhuman race which doesn't exist, but I could also wrongly apply a concept that does exist. Like I could think of some people as worms, and then the concept of a worm contains certain rules, like they don't have legs, they are on the ground and so on, and I could misjudge and think that these people there, they are worms. That would not mean that the concept of a worm as such is wrong. I mean, it does apply to other things in the world. It would just mean that it was wrongly applied here in this case. And the same, again, is true for concepts that are empty concepts that cannot be applied anywhere in the world, like unicorns or dragons, or if you want, subhuman races or whatever. Everything which can be thought, which doesn't contradict itself, cannot be said to be a wrong rule. At most, it can just be said to be a rule that is empty because there is no object to which this rule applies. But it could, in theory, apply to some object. There could be such a thing as magic. And therefore, it is always, if we are wrong, our judgment, our application of a rule, which is wrong. Kant says that in the course of our lives and intellectual development, the power of judgment comes second. So the intellect is the first intellectual faculty which develops. It starts developing even in very small children, right? Like they form concepts, they form certain rules about the world. They will learn early on, okay, this is a chair, it's for sitting, and this is a table, I'm not supposed to sit on it, and this is food I like, and this broccoli I don't like. But only with more time and with some trial and error, Kant says, can we develop our power of judgment. We have concepts first. That doesn't mean necessarily that we can apply them. Like, think of a physician. When he's standing in front of a patient and he observes the patient has these and those symptoms, then he can make the judgment that, okay, these symptoms, they fit to this sickness. I have learned there's this particular illness, so this is a concept I have, a set of rules, and I know this illness causes these symptoms. But maybe there's another illness which causes somewhat similar symptoms. And so knowing about these illnesses, having these concepts in my intellect is one thing, and that's what I will mainly learn when studying medicine. But now I have to also learn to judge correctly which of these rules applies in a specific case. I have to learn to tell apart when there are two or more sicknesses with somewhat similar symptoms, which one I have here in this case. And this will need some practice. Kant also says that it is lack of the power of judgment which should be called stupidity. Not lack of intellect, but lack of power of judgment, so of being able to apply your intellect. Kant stresses that you could have a small or a narrow intellect, that is an intellect containing few concepts, but you could still be applying those concepts correctly. And on the other hand, you could be very educated, very knowledgeable, meaning you have a wide intellect that contains many concepts, many rules, but you are stupid if you are unable to apply those. Like, for example, I may not have such great botanical knowledge as someone like Heidegger or Celan had. If I go into a forest, I may not recognize most of the plants. Like, surely I could tell a rose apart from a lily, but most flowers I will not recognize because I simply lack those concepts. But still, those concepts I do have, I can apply correctly maybe. And that would mean I'm not stupid. But if, on the other hand, no matter how vast my knowledge, how vast my concepts may be, I cannot apply them. So if, for example, I have a concept of a certain kind of mushroom that can be eaten, and another kind of mushroom that looks somewhat similar, but that can't be eaten, that is poisonous, and now I'm picking mushrooms and I confuse them and I just bite into the mushroom without thinking much and without judging correctly, and so I poison myself, then that is being stupid. So stupidity to Kant is never about a lack of concepts and therefore a lack of knowledge. It is a lack in the power of judgment and therefore a lack in the ability to apply and to use your knowledge. Kant also often stresses that only the intellect can really be taught or schooled. And this, according to Kant, is what it means to be a scholar, to have scholarly knowledge. It means that your intellect has been taught, that you have been given many, many concepts. I refer back to my lecture on what is science to Kant, because there I explained that according to him, um, science can be divided into historical scholarship and rational science, and only that is actual science. Historical scholarship is not limited to history, it is any kind of um, going into the world and just looking at the facts and learning about how things are, without necessarily understanding why they are that way. So, sure, the historian can look at what happened in history, just like that, the biologist can look at what kinds of animals live in that particular forest there and how do they live. um, the point is that this historical knowledge can be gained through your own studying and observation, or it can be gained from someone else who made those observations and who tells you about them in a lecture or in a book. Um, so you can go into the forest yourself and look what animals you may find there. You can also read a biological book about that forest and what animals live there. Um, in both cases, you are extending your intellect because you are learning new rules, new concepts. And that is, once again, that is all that really can be taught. I also talked about in my lectures on what is philosophy to Kant and what is wisdom to Kant. Talked about the fact that according to Kant, you cannot really learn philosophy. So here, these lectures, what I'm saying is true for them too. They give you historical knowledge. So they expand the knowledge saved in your mind about what Kant said, what Kant's philosophical positions were. But that in itself won't make you a philosopher. That in itself won't mean that you can think. You may just have this as that knowledge now, without being able to use and apply it to life. Now, of course, that's not what I want. As an Aufklärer, it is my deep wish to not just extend people's knowledge, because I don't believe that knowledge as such has any particular value, but rather, I do want to help with your Aufklärung. I do want to help you to learn how to actually think and live. So I do hope that you will take this up and it will become something lived, something that is a real part of you, that transforms you in some way. But still, a lecture as such cannot necessarily do that. It cannot force that on you. All it can sort of force on you is new knowledge, new concepts. And therefore, Kant stresses that there are many scholars who, as scholars, may have lots of concepts, they may know many things, and therefore they may even be able to be decent teachers of scholarship. They may be decent professors giving lectures, or decent writers of a scientific, of a scholarly book. But many don't have the power of judgment to apply their own knowledge to life. Many are not really able, so to say, to survive outside in the real world despite all their knowledge. And Kant also says that being a great scholar, having lots of knowledge, without the power of judgment on when and how to apply it, is what makes one pedantic. So since Kant says that a lack of the power of judgment is stupidity, even though he doesn't outright say this, you could conclude that to him, being pedantic is sort of scholarly stupidity. Because the pedantic scholar is someone who may know lots of rules, but who blindly applies these rules everywhere, who has no judgment about when to apply and when to not apply his rules. So he may be in polite society, he may be among common non-scholarly people, and he will still insist on his terminology instead of accepting the common way of speaking. Like, for example, I in these lectures stress that to Kant an appearance, so something appearing, is not the same as something seeming to be, right? I said if a thing seems to be this or that way, then it is not really that way, it just seems so. But if it appears in a certain way, that to Kant doesn't mean that it isn't really like it appears. It just means completely neutrally that it appears. It means it is not a thing in itself, independently of us, but rather this is the thing how it appears to us. This is the thing as we are affected by it, the thing as our representation. It is not an illusion to Kant, it is completely real. Just real not as a thing in itself that is independent of us, but rather real as ours, as our representation, but real nonetheless. Now, this is really important in Kant's philosophy, but if I had a normal conversation with a normal person, and that person said about something, oh, this appears to be the truth, and I were to correct that person and were to say, no, you must say, this seems to be the truth to me, because this is ultimately an illusion. It is just how it seems to you, but not how it really is and how it appears. Then that would be pedantic of me, expecting in a normal conversation where everyone could know perfectly well what is meant by the words, expecting perfect use of Kantian terminology. So Kant also mentions that there is not just scholarly pedantry, there is pedantry of all sorts of kinds, he says. So there is such a thing as being pedantic in the ways of fashion. So sticking to certain rules of fashion that are that are in place right now in this specific present, and applying them to everything and expecting everything and everyone to conform to those rules, and not allowing a single step outside of those rules. Or there's religious pedantry, when someone insists on certain cult rules, on doing religion in a specific way, maybe down to the smallest details, insisting on you having to pray so and so many times a day, or having to pray in this specific manner, turning in this specific direction during prayer. That is pedantic. It is taking one rule and applying that rule to everything, and not using your power of judgment, or simply not having the power of judgment, to decide if that rule should apply here or not. And also, of course, there's such a thing as moral pedantry, which, however, you must understand correctly, because I'm not saying that we must not always apply the moral law. No, as a law, it must be applied always, without exception. That is, to Kant, what the difference between a rule and a law is. A rule may allow for exceptions, a law does not. It is a moral law to have regard for all human beings always. But there are certain rules that people come up with about how to practice this morality, how to practice this regard. And those rules themselves, they are not really moral laws. They are more like rules of conduct. And this is basically what political correctness is about. Giving such rules of conduct and then being pedantic about those rules. Saying that those rules must be followed always. You must always avoid these words because they are racist, or you must always avoid these things because they are, I don't know, cultural appropriation. So there is no power of judgment used here to distinguish between various cases. And these people who are politically correct in that manner, they don't allow for any room or for any exceptions. So they may say dressing up as an Indian, or saying Indian instead of Native American, that is racist because it's cultural appropriation. And they don't have the power of judgment to understand that yes, maybe it is racist in some contexts. Maybe there are contexts where it would be very much inappropriate and offensive and an act of disregard for a white person to dress up in some cheap costume with feathers. But maybe, on the other hand, if a small child in kindergarten or in daycare just innocently dresses up, maybe that's not necessarily racist, and maybe that's not something you need to fight and forbid. And this requires power of judgment instead of being pedantic and applying your rules without any judgment everywhere equally. And here Kant says, if someone must be pedantic, then scholarly pedantry is the one that is the least insufferable, because the scholarly pedant, while he is pedantic, at least he's correct and you can still learn from him. He may be a bit annoying and overbearing with his rules, but the rules he does apply, they are correct. While those other pedantic people, they are much worse because they just get on your nerves and annoy you without even teaching you anything of value, Kant would say. But anyways, the point is that you can learn, or you can be taught concepts. So the intellect can be taught, Kant says, but the power of judgment cannot be taught. So you either have to be born with. This is what Kant in German calls Mutterwitz, so mother wit or natural wit, or you can train it. And how do you train it? Well, simply by using it, and surely using it wrong sometimes, but just using it again and again, making judgments, actually applying rules. And when you do that with time, you may get better at it. But it cannot be taught, because teaching, as opposed to training, teaching, Kant says, comes down to instructing our intellect through rules, giving us rules. And if the power of judgment is the faculty that applies rules, then you cannot teach it, because that would mean giving a rule about how and when to apply your rules. But if such a rule was given, then I would again need the power of judgment to decide when to follow this general rule and when not to follow it. Unless I was given another rule about when to follow this rule about when to follow rules. But you can see that this won't work. There wouldn't be an end to it. Which reminds me that some time ago I had a talk with a somewhat naive student who said that oh, there's so much fake news and alternative facts and lies and propaganda on the internet. Someone should do something about it by creating a website that contains just the truth and that judges all the news and the fake news for you and tells you what is a true fact and what is a lie. And of course, the problem with such a website would be that okay, what if that website itself is lying to you, on purpose or not on purpose? What if that website itself is containing not the facts but alternative facts? You want a website so you don't have to make a judgment of your own and be responsible for that. But then you would still have to make a judgment about that website and about whether that website is trustworthy. Unless, of course, there was another website judging that truth website and telling you whether it is trustworthy or not. But then how would you know whether to trust that third website? So, of course, there could be a fourth, but again, we can see that this won't work. There needs to be some point where I need to make my own judgment and be responsible for it. I can't just say, oh, it is too hard for me to judge who to trust, and so someone should tell me who to trust, because I would still have to judge if to trust that someone or not. And by the way, I actually don't think that this in itself is such a big problem. It's way overblown. Like in most cases, in almost all cases, it's usually pretty easy and doesn't even require lots of research or any such thing. It's pretty easy usually to distinguish truth from lies. Like you really don't have to fall for conspiracy theories if you don't want to. It's quite clear without being an expert or without doing extended research that yes, there is a climate crisis, or yes, there was a COVID pandemic and so on. Or yes, Russia is evil and no, Ukraine is not ruled by Nazis. Like it's not hard to know the truth in these cases. The thing is that most lies in this world, they are not good lies. I mean, here on YouTube, with most channels, you really don't even need to look at the videos and actually watch them. You need to only look at the thumbnail of the video or at the title of the video, and you can in many cases immediately tell that this is not a serious video. This is just hysterical, this is just ideological, this is just propaganda, this is just meant to incite your sensitivities and to make you angry. Like if the video title is something like this new Vogue show by Disney destroys this or that beloved franchise, and with Vogue and destroys spelled in all caps, then you just know that you don't have to click on that video, and you just know that this is not an honest, level-headed video. It is usually pretty easy to tell apart who is serious and who has some honesty and love for truth, even if they may go wrong at times, but who at least tries to be right, and to tell who's just a propagandist or a grifter. Now, the real problem is not to tell them apart, because anyone who has a real hunger for the truth will find the truth. If you have this hunger for truth and this love for truth, you will, in most cases, almost instinctively know where to look and where not to look. Instinctively know who tells the truth and who is lying to you. Now, the real problem is, I would say, that many people, they just don't care for truth at all. It's not that they honestly want truth and they are just too stupid and therefore fall for lies, but rather they don't want truth. They want to hear what fits their ideology. They want to follow grifters. They themselves are probably grifters on a smaller scale in their own personal lives. They are just like the people who follow, deeply dishonest and evil scum. So this is the real issue that actual Aufklärung has to address. We don't just have to teach people better judgment, rather we have to give them better hearts. We have to make them better people. But that aside, because it doesn't really belong here into this lecture, that's a matter for another time. The point is that Kant makes, you can't teach, you can only train the power of judgment. And how do you do that? Again, you train it by, like you train anything, like you train your muscles or like you train an instrument or whatever, simply by trying, by using it and getting better at it. And Kant says that one thing that can help is examples. Examples, Kant says, are not for the intellect, because the intellect is the faculty of rules. The intellect deals in abstract concepts that really don't contain anything else besides what that concept, what that rule contains. So the concept of a mammal contains giving milk to their young, but it doesn't contain having 4 legs or 2 legs or no legs, living on land or in the water, because that is not necessary for being a mammal. Some mammals do this, some don't. And the intellect could be taught only abstract concepts. But in order to learn how to apply those concepts, it may be helpful to be given examples. For example, if someone points you at certain mammals, if someone tells you, here, see, this dog mother is giving milk to her pups, she's a mammal. Because here you are basically given a specific individual case, and you are told that here the power of judgment should apply this specific rule. So through examples, you are given some cases where the rules are already applied for you, and hopefully that will help you learning how that may look like and applying that rule in other cases yourself. And that is one reason why I like giving so many examples and anecdotes and analogies and explanations here in my lectures and also in my texts, because after all, I'm an Aufklärer. I am not simply doing philosophy as the science of reason, as Kant did. Kant is mainly writing for other scholars, not for a wider public, and Kant is pretty scientific. He, on purpose, in the critique of pure reason, left examples out for the most part. He's writing in a very abstract manner, which is also what makes reading and understanding him hard for many people. And that has its place. In a purely scholarly scientific text, you can be abstract and you don't need to give tons of examples. But as Fichte already pointed out, there needs to come a time once the science of reason is finished, and Fichte, mainly did finish and complete it, then there needs to come a new chapter in the history of philosophy, and that is when the science of reason is applied to life, when it is turned into an art of reason, into an actual lived practice. And that is exactly what I, as an Aufklärer, want to do. I want to take this philosophy, this abstract philosophy of someone like Kant, and to bring it into contact with life, to give it to more common people, to help them understand and use and live it. And that's why I found examples to be helpful. But of course, you also have to be mindful of a warning Kant gives, because he says there's also a danger in examples. For since the unaufkläred people, they are always ruled by their senses, by their sensuality, and they have a hard time ever abstracting from their sensuality. For that reason, you will often find that when you give someone examples, because the example will always contain more than just the concept, just the rule. Else it wouldn't be an example, but just that concept in general. The example will always contain parts that are not necessary, but rather contingent. So when I give you examples for dogs, the dog I point at will have a certain color or a certain height or will belong to a certain breed. And if you are too unaufkläred and not able to distinguish that which is just sensual and contingent from that which is necessary and belonging to the rule, then instead of helping you train your power of judgment, the example will rather limit your power of judgment. You will be shown, I don't know, a number of brown dogs, and now you will think that all dogs must be brown, and when you see a white dog, you will not judge that this is also a dog. So that is a danger that lies in examples. But anyways, I want to point out that in my experience, when it comes to Aufklärung, it is specifically this power of judgment and using it and being responsible for that, and this fact that this can't be taught, there can't be a general rule given for that would free you of your own responsibility, free you of having to make your own judgment. This is mainly what the unaufkläred struggle with and what they fear and what they have such a problem with. They don't want to make their own judgment. They want to have that judgment made for them. That is why they so happily will let other people be their leaders and guardians. As Kant says in his essay on Aufklärung, the unaufkläred may have a book that has intellect for him, or a spiritual director that has conscientiousness for him, or a physician that judges his diet for him. But of course, here you have the problem that if you say, I don't want to make my own judgments and be responsible, I want another person to judge for me, you would still have to make at least one judgment, and that is which person to pick as your guide. Who should you submit to, and who should you let make your judgments for you? And here, of course, you could again go wrong and be responsible, and people don't want that either, which is why they often submit to titles or to certificates. So they will ask, is someone a doctor or a professor or whatever? Because if you do that, then you basically also give this judgment about whom to follow away to someone else too. Because, I mean, a person is not just a doctor. They are not just born like that, but rather they had an exam, they wrote a doctor dissertation, and they were judged based on that by their university, right? So basically, when you're blindly following someone because he's a doctor, you are basically indirectly blindly following the person who made him a doctor, who judged that, yes, this guy is fit to be a doctor. And of course, that person may have misjudged. Not everyone who has this title of doctor is fit to be one. Here in Germany, we had quite a lot of scandals in the last years about politicians who had a doctor title, and then it came out that their dissertation was either, well, just very, very bad in the best cases, or in many cases they had actually committed fraud and had made many wrong quotations and so on, and many actually lost their title. But anyways, this is something I find often, and that is a problem, of course, if you want to just openly talk to people or help people, give people advice, because often they will not ask, is what is said true? Is it good advice? But they will only ask, is it said by a certified expert? So here in my area, I may have had discussions with Mohammedan students and tried to teach them something about Islam, but they probably wouldn't even listen and would immediately go, "Oh, are you a Hodja? My Hodja says something else." Well, I don't care what your Hodja says. The fact he's a Hodja means someone else, who probably was a Hodja before him, or an Imam or whatever, someone else said he is fit to stand in a mosque and teach about the Quran. Well, maybe that someone else was wrong. I mean, who said that someone else was fit to make that judgment? Again, someone else. Maybe he was wrong too, and all the way back. You should not ask, is that person teaching me about religion? Is he officially certified? Is he a Hodja? You should ask, is he knowledgeable about that religion? Is he right in what he says? Or I remember when a friend of mine had a friend struggling in life, having no orientation in life, having mental health issues, and he advised her to go to me and speak with me and let me help her. And I have helped people with mental health issues before. People have been much happier after talking to me for a while. People have stopped self-harming after talking to me for a while. People who used to get angry and upset a lot have become much happier after talking to me for a while. But this girl, without knowing me, said, "Oh, but he's not a trained therapist, so I can't go to him." Now, this was obviously not her own judgment. She didn't talk to me and first tried to find out if I could help her or not. She just said, "No, he hasn't studied psychology, so he can't help me." And once again, you should not simply ask, is this person a trained therapist? Does this person have some official credentials? You should ask, is that person himself happy and content and fulfilled in life? Does that person himself know how to live and how to love? Or does that person struggle with life? And then can that person help others and teach others with that? Does that person spread happiness and fulfillment around himself, or doesn't he? But these things would require looking. These things would require making a judgment. And that is what people want to run away from. For that same reason, because of that fear of making your own judgment, they don't just submit blindly to other people, maybe to certified experts, but also for that same reason, they submit to rules. They seek general rules on how to live their lives. You will find that a lot in how people deal with religion. That is, in most cases, they actually don't have a religion. Rather, what they have is a cult, and they confuse following certain cult rules, certain practices of how to do religion. They confuse that with the actual religion. And they want to be told by some priest or by some holy book, they want to be told how to live their lives. how many times they should pray in a day, what food they should eat or shouldn't eat, in what direction they should pray, when and with whom to have sex, and so on. And this can take absurd levels, right? Like those rules, they can control your whole life in certain more fundamentalist circles. Like there may be rules telling you how long your tie may be, that as a man you can't wear a silk tie that's too long, or rules that tell you how to drink, that you must not drink from a bottle, you can only drink from a glass or a cup, and you can only drink sitting, not standing, and only holding the glass with your right hand and not your left hand. And by the way, I made none of those rules up. Those are rules that some people actually do believe in and follow because of some bullshit hadith or whatever. The point is that these people, they don't want to try and have actual religion. Like, they don't seek God and closeness with God, finding God. And they don't want to have to ask in every situation, in every moment of their life, God, who put me here in this situation, in amidst these people, in front of these problems, what did God want from me in putting me here specifically? And what would be the godly action to take here, the conscientious, the religious action, the one that would be the most good, the most holy? But rather, they want to simply be told, here's a set of rules, follow them, then everything is fine. Then you will go to heaven and won't have to fear hell. And they fear making their own judgment so much, and the responsibility that can come with it. Because again, in judging we can go wrong, of course. They fear that so much that often they will rather take the most oppressive rules. They will rather live their lives as slaves of these fundamentalist rules in some cases, rather than dare make their own judgment. But don't fall, if you're not one of these people, don't fall into some atheist arrogance or whatever. Don't think that this is specifically a problem of cultish people. No, this is a problem that all unaufkläred people have in one way or another. And there are also many secular ways of submitting to specific life rules, specific guidelines for life like that. So, for example, when it comes to health, you have many people who try to be healthy according to certain rules, who want some experts, some physicians or whatever to tell them exactly how many steps a day do I need to go, what shoes do I need to wear because some orthopedist told me that they are good shoes, what should I eat, how many calories a day should I take in. These people don't want to listen to their bodies and to their body's signals, and to what their body needs from them, and what is good for their body and what is bad and harmful for their body. But rather, they want to give that responsibility away to someone else. And just recently I had this talk with someone who had back pains, and I told her that she should try to tune in with her body and listen to her body's signals, and not ignore the signals so long that they become stronger, they turn into pain that can no longer be ignored, but rather listen to the signals even at the start when they are still very quiet. And she said, how do I do that? Which basically translates to, I don't want to make my own judgment. I don't want to actually listen to my body in each moment, in each individual case, if maybe this posture, this way I sit, if my body enjoys that, or if that is straining my body somehow. But rather, I want to be given a general rule of how to behave. How do I listen to my body? And I had to answer, you didn't ask that when you were a baby. You didn't have to ask it. And if you had to ask that back then, you would not have learned to walk ever. Like as a baby or as a toddler, when you learn walking, you felt your body. You felt when you felt secure and carried by your feet, and when you felt insecure and wobbly. And of course, you went wrong sometimes, and surely you fell down a few times. But eventually, you learned how to stay and how to walk and how to move. And every animal, without having an intellect to which you could give rules, which you could instruct and teach through general rules, every animal learns that. They don't need a rule telling them, oh, you first have to take your right foot and put that forward, and then second you put your left foot forward. They just feel their body. And in my dad's work as a physiotherapist, that would basically be his work. He wouldn't give his patients a set of rules how to use their body. Rather, he would try to get them back to where they once were as children, as toddlers, and to help them listen to their bodies again and making their own judgment in each case. How can I best move here in this case? Or you may have people who try to get a rule on how to talk to women, how to pick up girls. I mean, there's this whole scene of pickup artists who allegedly teach you how to talk to girls and how to get their phone numbers. So if you ask me, they are real legit pickup artists, but their art of picking up is not the art of picking up girls. It is the art of picking up idiot men who fall for their bullshit, for their scam, and shove money into their ass for telling them this pickup bullshit. Because there are these people who will believe that apparently women are just like an automaton, like a ticket automaton. When you are in the subway, you just have to press the right buttons, and then you will get a ticket for your train. And just like that, when talking to a woman, I just have to say the right things, and then I will get her phone number. But that's not how it works. How it actually works is that every situation is different. Even with one and the same woman, she may react differently to the same words in different situations. And of course, every woman is also different. So what works with one woman may not work with the other woman. So really, you should just have power of judgment. You should just, in each individual situation, be able to judge what to say now. It doesn't work to have some set of general rules to go by. Or I know there are people who want to write a book, and instead of just doing that, they buy some book giving advice on how to write a bestseller, and they will go slavishly by that advice, telling them, oh, the first sentence and the first chapter, they must be like that, and your plot must be structured like that, and so on. And they don't seem to realize that if there was such a general rule according to which you could write a bestseller, then maybe that person giving that advice, having written that guidebook, would already have applied that rule and written his own bestseller. Or other people, as parents, will will read such books giving advice to parents on how to best train and tame their children. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? It's not about raising your child, about accompanying it and guiding it into life. These books are usually about how to break your child and how to tame and train it like some wild animal. Even though in this case specifically, judging right from wrong is usually ridiculously easy, because nature made it so easy for us, because there is this alarm installed in children. It's called crying, right? Usually you can be sure that when you make your child cry somehow, you have done something wrong and you should probably do something else. It's just that most parents, they ignore this natural alarm. I mean, it starts maybe right after the birth with circumcising the child when there's no medical need for it, making their child cry. And then it goes on in the following years, because they probably raise their child only with no's, only with forbidding things. Saying, no, you can't have chocolate or ice cream now. No, you can't have this toy, you already have enough toys. No, you must sit still now. No, you must not eat with your fingers. And they are not working together with the child, and they are not guiding the child. Rather, their parenting is nothing else but a constant fight, a constant war with the child, constantly trying to break the child. And again and again, almost every day, they will in some way or another cause distress to their child and cause tears in their child. And again, it should not be hard in this case to make a proper judgment. If your child is crying because of something you did to it, you probably did something evil. It's literally that easy and that black and white in most cases. And this requiring a certain set of rules so that you don't have to judge and be responsible for yourself, this of course also goes for morality. Again, this is basically what the morality of political correctness is about. They will tell you that there are specific rules that you must follow under all specific conditions. So they will tell you that there are certain rules that you must, under every circumstances, follow, and there are no exceptions. So they will tell you, for example, that as a white person, you can't say nigger, you must say N-word. And because this is now so common, at least in America, to an American listening to this, what I just said will probably be extremely shocking or extremely offensive, which, if you ask me, is extremely absurd. Like, you should rather be shocked at yourself that this is shocking to you, because I mean, we are not in kindergarten. We are not dealing with little children. We don't have to say the F word instead of fuck. Everyone knows which word is meant. In our minds, we hear the real word anyways. So why can't we pronounce the word? And we could discuss about whether it's appropriate to use such a word referring to people. Like whether we should probably better use another word like black people. But here, this is not about calling black people niggers. This is just about sort of quoting the word, right? I'm just talking about the word, and I'm just using the word to talk about itself, about the word. And by the way, it's completely absurd and inconsistent that this is just this specific word which is forbidden to use, and using it is apparently worse than killing a person, if you at least judging by the reaction some people have to it. Because, I mean, there are other words in history that were bad, that were probably even worse, and still we are allowed to use them in a sort of quoting manner, right? Like, I'm not allowed to say people used to say nigger I have to say people used to say the N-word, but I am allowed to say the Nazis used to greet each other with Heil Hitler. I don't have to say they used to greet each other with the HH formula. Why? I mean, this Heil Hitler also caused a lot of damage, right? But still, it's not seen as offensive. Like, of course, I should not use it. If I were to actually unironically use it and greet people like that, I would probably be a Nazi. But in talking about it, I can pronounce it. Why couldn't I? And this is exactly what I mean. People are so caught up in these general rules, they don't use their power of judgment to ask what is the specific case, what is the specific context in which, for example, a word is used. Or take the whole topic, which also is big in political correctness or in wokeness, this whole topic of rape and consent and sexual harassment, which was so big after Me Too. And there too, they will try to give you general rules. Like, for example, the feminists, they will have this slogan saying no means no. I mean, this is at best a very naive slogan. If you have any life experience, you will know, no, that is not the case. No doesn't always mean no. Whether it comes to sex or also to other things, people may often say no when actually they say yes. And now maybe they shouldn't do that. Maybe doing so is quite unaufkläred. And maybe as a more aufkläred person, you should not go with what they mean when they mean yes, but you should stick to what they say when they say no, even though they don't mean it, because really they should learn to say what they mean and not expect other people to think or act for them and to take responsibility instead of themselves taking responsibility. But still, the matter of the fact is that sometimes, probably oftentimes even, not just in sexual contexts, no means yes. And the opposite is also true. Very often, yes means no. Very often, someone may say yes to something, but actually mean no. And, I mean, if you had power of judgment, in most cases, it's not really hard to judge. Like, it's not really hard, usually, to judge whether a woman wants to have some sort of sexual contact with you or not. If you are not completely disregarding her and just not caring about whether she consents or not, and if you also are not thinking with your dick and are just more preoccupied with getting off than with what she wants, then it probably won't be too hard to judge, no matter what she's saying. But you can't just subsume it under this general rule, no means no. And this can go to absurd levels. Like, there are companies, at least in the US, as far as I know, that probably not out of conviction, but to avoid possible lawsuits, after Me Too, established guidelines for their employees that go so far as to say one employee can't even tip another on the shoulder. Because if one male employee would touch a female co-worker's shoulder, that could already be interpreted as sexual harassment. And I mean, in most cases, it simply isn't, right? In most cases, it's a complete innocent gesture to just get someone's attention. But obviously, people here don't want to make a judgment, a case-by-case judgment, so they will just go with this general rule. But to be clear here, don't confuse what I'm saying. I'm not just bashing wokeness or bashing the left. Because the other side, the right-wingers who will complain about this woke political correctness, they are really no better, just in the opposite way. Because they will also claim that there's a general role. Like they will say that lightly touching someone's shoulder to get their attention is never sexual harassment. And that, of course, or that certain things which the woke left will claim are cultural appropriation and therefore racist, that they are never racist. And of course, that's equally wrong. In most cases, touching someone's shoulder will just be an innocent way of getting that person's attention. But someone might do it as a form of sexual harassment. And likewise, certain words or dressing in certain things, it might be completely innocent in some situations, but in other situations it might be inappropriate. So really, what you need is not a general rule saying this is allowed, this is forbidden. And what you don't need is these bitter fights between left and right about those general rules. Rather, what you need is what both groups try to flee from, what both groups hate and fear. It is taking responsibility, actual responsibility for your actions. Doing actions that you can actually stand by. Don't hide behind some general rule. Rather, stand by your actions. Say, this I judge to be right, this I judge to be wrong. But with that, back to Kant. So far, I talked about the power of judgment in very general terms. And generally, you could say that it is sort of the bridge between the general, so the intellect's concept, the intellect's rule, and the specific, so the specific individual case that sensuality gives you. But now, that bridge could be passed in two directions, right? And therefore, Kant says there are two powers of judgment, or rather we should say there's of course only one power of judgment, but it can be used in two different ways. One is the determining power of judgment, and the other is the reflecting power of judgment. When the power of judgment is determining, that means that it already has a rule that the intellect provides. The intellect already has a concept, and now you are determining whether something belongs, some individual case belongs under that rule or not. So I see a specific animal, I already have a concept of what a dog is, and I already have a concept in my intellect of what a cat is. Now my power of judgment just must determine, is this a dog or is it a cat or something else entirely. So which concept that I already have, I already know what a dog is and what a cat is, which of these concepts applies here. So the determining power of judgment is the faculty of subsuming the specific under the general, Kant says. So I have a specific case, a specific individual example, and I subsume it under a general rule which I already have in my intellect. The reflecting power of judgment goes the other way. This is when I don't have a rule yet. So I'm faced with an individual case and I don't have a rule fit to subsume it under. So now I use my power of judgment to reflect about this case. Kant translates reflecting into German as überlegen, which you could maybe retranslate into English as pondering or considering or deliberating. So the reflecting power of judgment here you are sort of in your head discussing this thing with yourself. You are reflecting on it, you are considering it, pondering it, and you are not, so to say, going from top to bottom, taking a rule you already have and applying it to the specific case, but rather going upwards from the bottom to the top, taking the specific case and reflecting on it to try and find your general rule. Now, Kant wrote the Critique of the Power of Judgment. It is the last of his three main works, his three critiques, after the Critique of Pure Reason and the Critique of Practical Reason. And in this critique, he is almost exclusively dealing with the reflecting power of judgment, not with the determining power of judgment. He says that this determining power of judgment doesn't require its own critique. And why is that? Because, well, the critiques are about our three faculties of thinking: intellect, power of judgment, and reason, being what Kant calls constitutive. That means giving laws. Not just dealing with laws that are given to them from the outside, not just ordering things according to laws and rules given to them, but giving their own laws. And Kant says that the intellect gives laws to nature, and therefore it is constitutive to nature and to our experience of nature. And that is something that I talked about in previous lectures, right? That is what the intellect does through its 12 categories. Giving laws to nature, for example, the law of causality. On the other hand, reason, and this I will discuss in some future lectures when I get to Kant's moral philosophy, reason, Kant says, gives laws not to nature, but to freedom. So it gives laws not of being, but of what ought to be. It gives the moral law. It is constitutive for our morality. But the determining power of judgment, it does neither. Because it is, after all, just about applying rules, but it doesn't itself give the rules. It gets those rules either from the intellect or from reason. And now it has to decide which laws of nature apply here in this case, or it has to decide how to apply the moral law here in this case, which action would now be my moral duty. But it is only, so to say, serving the two other faculties. It is not constituting its own set of laws that it gives a priori. I mean, that is what the critique, all three critiques are about, right? And I talked about that in previous lectures. They ask, how are synthetic judgments, no matter if they are logical or aesthetic or practical judgments, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible? The determining power of judgment itself does not constitute such synthetic judgments a priori, because it gets the concepts, the rules by which it judges from the intellect or from reason. So they may give certain concepts or ideas a priori, but the power of judgment, if it's determining, just uses them. Hence, Kant discusses the reflecting power of judgment. This power of judgment is needed whenever we want to not just apply what we already know, but to learn something new. So it is needed by the natural scientist when he wants to make new discoveries, right? So if he finds a new species of bug or of plant or whatever, he doesn't yet have a concept of that species. He doesn't have a rule to subsume it under. Rather, he will reflect on that species. He will do research and observation and experiment to try and find such a rule, such a law. But also in an inventor who wants to invent a new sort of machine. He doesn't have a construction manual yet. He doesn't know yet how to build that machine because there's no concept of it yet. He tries to reflect and to judge what he should do to build that machine. But also more common people in more everyday situations need this. Like if you're a baker and your cake turned out too dry, you will probably reflect on what you did wrong, and you will try to find a rule that maybe you don't know yet on what makes the cake more dry or less dry. Or if you are a student at a new school, you may try to find out which teachers will leave you alone if you forget your homework, and which teachers will give you detention. So you don't have concepts of those new teachers yet. You first try to reflect on them and to find the rules according to which these teachers behave. But of course, all of this is happening a posteriori, right? A priori means I make a judgment without experience, based purely on reason. And a posteriori means I make a judgment from experience. And here, since I'm not starting from a rule, this rule could be an empirical rule in empirical concepts, but it could also be a rule a priori, like the 12 categories of the intellect about which I talked in previous lectures, or like when it comes to morality, the moral law, the categorical imperative, about which I will talk in future lectures. But if you're not applying a rule you already have, but rather seeking a rule, you obviously start from an individual case that you got from sensuality. So a case that you can only know a posteriori, because that is how our cognition works. The individual case is always only known to viewing, and all our viewing is sensual. Therefore, it is receptive, therefore it is a posteriori. The only things we can know a priori are generalities, are general rules. Well, if the rules that the reflecting power of judgment finds are rules it finds a posteriori, that also means that those rules can have generality but not universality. I talked about that in my previous lecture on what is science to Kant. There I said that things we find a posteriori from experience, through induction or through analogy, we can generalize it. Like I can see a few white swan and then generalize that generally swan are white. But this can never be a universal statement. I can never be sure, even if so far I haven't found an exception, I can never be sure that this is true without exception. Now the question is, can this reflective power of judgment, like the intellect or like reason in certain cases, can it be constitutive? That is, can it give its own rules, its own laws? It is clear that it doesn't get laws from elsewhere, from the intellect or from reason, because if it did, it would not be the reflecting power of judgment, it would be the determining power of judgment. But it seems that all the laws it finds are, as I just explained, laws a posteriori, right? Because the reflecting is happening a posteriori. But, Kant says, this is not quite true. There is actually one pure concept that is not a pure intellectual concept like the 12 categories, and therefore it also is not part of the table of categories, even though it is not a concept a posteriori, but one we have a priori. There is one concept a priori that belongs to the reflecting power of judgment. One concept that, as a reflecting power of judgment, it doesn't get from intellect or reason, but it also doesn't arrive at by a posteriori, by reflecting about experience, but rather a concept that it brings a priori to experience and to all its acts of reflection. And that is the concept of purposiveness. Now, in German, Kant says Zweckmäßigkeit, and here you can go back to my lecture on what is philosophy to Kant, where I already addressed this Zweckmäßigkeit as the bridge between the theoretical and practical philosophy to Kant, and there I discussed the issues with translating it. Basically, the Zweck in German is the end, the goal, the purpose of something. And so zweckmäßig is what serves that Zweck. So I will translate it with purposiveness. So for example, a knife, you can ask, what is the Zweck? What is the end? What is the purpose of a knife? What is the knife there for? And of course, the knife is meant as a tool to cut things. So the knife is purposive if it serves this purpose well. For that, it should be sharp, because a blunt knife doesn't serve its purpose. And it should also have a hilt, because if it was just a sharp blade, then it could be good at cutting, but it would also be cutting my hand when I tried to use it. And that would also kind of defeat the purpose. So a purposive knife would be sharp and also have a hilt. So what could you say? What does this concept of purposiveness mean in general? Well, it means, according to Kant, that something, the object which we judge to be purposive, something is not arbitrary, not contingent, and it didn't just by accident come into being through purely mechanical means, like take a mountain. A mountain is not purposive. If, for example, if it's a mountain that was a volcano, then it came to be through mechanical means that can be described by the laws of physics. That is, at some point, lava came out of the earth and formed around that hole where it came out of, formed a sort of mountain. There's no purpose here. When you say that something is purposive, you are saying that it appears to be created with a purpose. That is, it seems to be the product of an intellect akin to yours. And you are sort of recognizing this other intellect. You are sort of, with your own intellect, recognizing that this object is formed not randomly, but according to intellectual laws, according to laws that an intellect can grasp and understand and agree with. And remember, grasp in German is begreifen, which directly relates to Begriff, to concept. So it is something, when I say you can grasp it, I mean you can conceive on it, you can understand it. Now, Kant stresses that this is not to say that there really is an intellect which created the purposive object. So when we say there is purposiveness in nature, this is not supposed for Kant to be an argument for God and for intelligent design. Trying to prove God that way trying to say, oh, something like the eye seems to have a purpose in the body. It cannot have come about randomly. Someone must have created it with the purpose of giving animals something to see by. That would be what is called the physico-theological proof for God. And Kant disproves this. Kant shows that it doesn't work. I will not talk about this here in this lecture, rather in some future lecture when I get to his philosophy of religion. But here, the point is not to say that the purposive object really was created by another intellect. The point is just that when we judge it, we judge that it appears as if it was created by an intellect. A thing is purposive if it sort of offers itself to our reflecting power of judgment. It sort of offers itself to be judged, for us to find the rule which this object follows, the rule to which this object is a subject to. And that implies that there is such a rule. That implies that we can make sense of that object. So imagine you were to fly to another planet and you would discover alien life there. And you would discover some sort of animal, and at the front of its head, it had a mouse. You would probably, judging by analogy, assume that it uses this mouse for eating, even before having seen it eat. So you would not need necessarily a new experience, a new empirical data, but you would judge by analogy, because you would probably say, even if not consciously, if not in those words, this would probably be your unconscious reflection, that this would make sense. For the purpose of eating, having an opening in the body in this specific place at the front of the head is very purposive. Like if the mouse was, let's say, on the back, that would not be so purposive. You could not say, you could not make sense of that so easily. You would ask yourself, no matter if you think that God designed this animal or that this came about through evolution, you would still ask yourself, what's the point? Why would this have been created, or why would this have developed? It doesn't seem to be very advantageous. I mean, the animal would need the food to lie on the ground, and then it would have to sort of roll on its back to eat the food if the mouse was on the back. So having the mouse in the front of the head is purposive. And now if you looked into the mouse and you noted this animal to have very sharp teeth, you would probably assume that it eats meat. And if you saw the animal had blunt teeth, you would probably assume that it eats plants. And if it had both, like us having sharp teeth in the front and more blunt teeth on the side, you would probably assume that it eats both. Because again, this would fit the purpose that you are judging to be there. So, I mean, your reflecting power of judgment is seeking a rule. It sees this mouse, it sees these teeth, and it asks, what rule do these fall under? It asks, what concept can I make of this? What can I say? What is this? And it would probably judge, well, what this is a mouse. What these are teeth for meat or for plants. Because it seems that this is the rule that can be very easily applied here. But now imagine, on the other hand, if that animal looked more chaotic. If it had both sharp teeth and blunt teeth. And not sharp teeth in the front and blunt teeth on the side, but not in an orderly manner at all. Like one sharp tooth and then one blunt one and then a sharp one again. Or if it had the mouse on its back, as I already said, or if it had some teeth in its mouth, but only like a handful with big gaps in between, and then another tooth on its back and some on the side of its elbow. And if it had wings, but only one wing on its back and another wing growing out of its forehead, like if that thing looked like a complete freak of nature and abomination, then you could not make sense of it. Your reflecting power of judgment would try to come up with a rule to explain what this thing is, to explain what these wings are, for example, what their purpose is. But it could not very well find a rule, because it would see that since the wings are not symmetrical on the back, the creature could not fly with those wings. So what else are they? They look like wings, but they can't be wings. And so if a thing is purposive, that means that our reflecting power of judgment can easily find a rule fitting it. It can easily make sense of it. But if it is not purposive, that means that we will have a hard time finding a rule for it when we are reflecting about it. Now, Kant stresses that this is a subjective problem, not an objective problem, because this is not to say that there is no rule that this thing falls under. It is just to say that we can't find the rule. We struggle with making sense of this thing when we reflect about it. Like, imagine you are looking at someone's bookshelf and you find that the books are ordered alphabetically by the author's name. Or you find that the books are ordered by the color of their covers. When you reflect about it and try to find a rule here, you try to find why is this book in this specific place on the shelf, your reflecting power of judgment will easily find the rule. You will just glance at the colors and you will immediately see, it's ordered by color. Or you will just read some author's names and you will immediately realize, it's ordered by in alphabetical order. But if you looked at the shelves and at the books there, and it seemed completely chaotic, like a book of one color here and one color there, a book whose author's name or whose title starts with this letter of the alphabet, and then a book starting with a completely different letter, and here a book on this topic, and here a book on that topic, then you could not make sense of it. It would seem as if someone had just randomly put the books into the shelves without thinking about it. It would seem like something that wasn't created by another intellect, but by mere chance. And now, this must not necessarily be the case. I mean, maybe there is some sense behind how these books are ordered in the shelf. Maybe the person who put them there in chronological order as he bought them. But since you don't know which book was bought when, you can't possibly find out that they are standing in the shelf in the order they have been bought. Or maybe they have been ordered according to how much the person likes the book. Like, maybe his favorite books come first and the least favorite books come last. But again, this is not a rule that your reflecting power of judgment can easily find. So again, it's a subjective problem. Kant is not saying that there couldn't be a rule, possibly, when a thing is not purposive. He is saying that when it is purposive, it sort of offers itself to our power of judgment. It is more easy to find a rule here because it immediately appears as if some other intellect, which as an intellect thinks in rules like mine, is as if another intellect had created this and had created it with a plan in mind. As a side note, I think this concept of purposiveness that Kant talks about is helpful in understanding a certain kind of horror that didn't really exist in Kant's day so much yet, but only came about in more recent times. And that is what you could call eldritch horror, or the horror of eldritch abominations. Because all horror seems to be about helplessness in a way. Like if I can deal with something, then there's no horror. Then I don't have to fear it. If I can deal with it, if I can defeat it. Horror is really about things that somehow we are helpless or powerless with. But different kinds of horror deal with different kinds of helplessness. So, for example, there's horror which works with shock, like jump scare and so on. Here I'm overwhelmed by the suddenness. And then, of course, there's horror which works with lots of violence and gore and just brutality and cruelty. But now think of this eldritch horror. Like, think of the creatures that someone like Lovecraft created, like Cthulhu and the other dark gods of the Cthulhu mythos. If you have ever seen images of those. Or think of someone like Miura and his manga Berserk and the demons in his images. Or if you have seen the movie The Thing, think of this alien creature at the end of the movie and how it looks like, this terrible, freakish creature. This sort of horror, I think, works exactly because of the lack of purposiveness. The horror here is not simply physical helplessness. Like, of course, these creatures, they are also dangerous to us physically. They may kill us or torment us or whatever. They are monsters and demons and dark gods. But if it was just about us being physically powerless and overpowered and helpless, then you could also think of, I don't know, a giant cosmic lion that is big enough to swallow a whole planet. We would be powerless against that lion. But still, as a lion, no matter how big it is, its form still is purposive. And so it, even if it was very, very much dangerous and life-threatening, used in a story or like in a movie or in a picture, it doesn't seem so terrible to us like these demonic and freakish, eldritch creatures. Why is that? I would say because they are not purposive. That is, if we look at their design, it seems pure chaos. It's not something we can understand. They seem of a completely different and freakish and alien nature that we cannot make sense of. And that is their horror. The helplessness here is not so much a physical helplessness, it is a reflecting helplessness. It's not that we are simply physically overwhelmed, like this monster is stronger than us and threatens our life, but rather it would seem to me that we are sort of intellectually overwhelmed, because not just can we not overpower this monster with our physical powers to save our lives, we cannot even sort of overpower it with our mind. Like, if it was just a life-threatening monster, it could also be, I don't know, a ghost or a werewolf or a vampire, which may be dangerous, which may be stronger than me, which may threaten my life, but at least I can still make sense of it in a way. I can still find a rule under which it stands under. And so it is not quite as terrible, because that which has been understood has already been overpowered and tamed, at least by my intellect, at least by my mind. But here we have things that don't just overpower us physically, but mentally threatening to make us go mad. Like we try to make sense of them. We try to understand what it is we are seeing, but we just can't conceptualize them. And maybe it's also not a coincidence that this is a fairly recent type of horror that appeared mostly at the start of the last century and since. Because maybe this has to do with the progress of natural science, with us making sense of the world more and more, finding more and more rules under which this world is operating, and thereby also being able more and more to control this world. Like something like a thunderstorm has lost lots of its horror for us because, for one, we understand what the lightning is. It's not just some ununderstood power of nature anymore, but rather we understand the rule according to which this lightning works. And by understanding that rule, we can also use that understanding to protect us to some degree. Like we can now use the lightning conductor to protect ourselves. Or likewise, a sickness like the plague doesn't seem to be quite as terrible to us anymore because, for one, we understand what's going on. We understand that there's some bacteria or some virus causing the sickness. And that understanding also helps us maybe finding some drug against it, some antidote, some vaccine. It's not just some terrible fate or scourge of God anymore. And maybe this is the reason why this new type of horror arose, that is really the horror of not understanding something, reflecting about something, but our reflection being helpless and hopeless, something that goes completely beyond our understanding, and therefore also beyond our ability not just to make sense of it, but also thereby to control it and to protect ourselves from it. But coming back once more to Kant, we can find something quite interesting and quite remarkable. And that is that nature, all in all, seems to be quite purposive. We can, after all, make sense of nature. And this is something that most people will not wonder about, precisely because it is just everywhere. It is so common that they will never question it. But as Plato already said, philosophy starts with wondering. If you don't question things, if they just take them for granted because maybe they are a daily occurrence, then you will not be a philosopher. You will be unaufkläred. Philosophy starts when you don't take things for granted and when you wonder, how can this be? Or what does this mean? And here Kant does wonder, especially in his later years and like in his critique of the power of judgment. Because as he showed in the critique of pure reason, the intellect gives laws to nature through the 12 categories. Like we give nature the law of causality. Everything that we ever experience must have a cause, or else we could not experience it. Everything we experience, we have the law of substantiality, must be a substance or the accidents of a substance. And it is only those accidents that can be changed, never the substances as such. But those laws that the intellect gives to nature, they are very general laws. They are like the elementary laws of nature, and they don't go beyond that. And that means there still remains the question, how do these laws work specifically? So I know a priori that there is causality in nature, but I can only know a posteriori about the specific causal relationships in nature, like that heat may let a substance extend and not contract. Well, in the critique of pure reason, Kant basically answered the question, how is pure natural science, that is, how is metaphysics dealing with nature, with the objects of nature, how is that possible? And I talked about that in the previous lecture. It is possible through our 12 categories and through realizing that those are constitutive for nature. So they are not just the way we must look at nature, but rather only through them can anything appear to us. Only through them can anything be a representation in our mind. So everything that appears to me must, for example, appear as causal, as caused by something. That explains how pure natural science is possible, how it is possible to make this statement, this judgment, that everything must have a cause in nature. But how is empirical natural science possible? So how is it possible to find the specific causes for things? And again, we just take this for granted that it is possible, so we don't question it. But now imagine this. Imagine nature was under laws, but the laws were chaotic. There would be different laws in each and every case. Like, for example, you have one bird being born out of an egg, but then the mother who laid that egg has another child, and it is born as a living child, not out of an egg. And then a third bird is born through climbing out of her mouth. Or imagine that the sun with its heat melts ice, but another fluid, let's say apple juice, under the sun actually turns to ice, actually turns cold. Imagine that one lion was eating meat, but the next lion was eating plants. Imagine that one apple you eat tastes good and can be eaten, and another apple on that same tree is actually poisonous and deadly. Such a nature, if the world worked like that, such a nature would be chaotic and without purpose. I mean, we could not exist in such a nature, right? We could not make sense of it. We could not find any rules to live by. Like, for example, this plant is poisonous, this plant can be eaten. It would not be possible to live there. But such a nature can be conceived, and in such a nature, there would still be this general law our intellect gives, that is the law of causality, right? Because everything I described happened because of a cause. I die because the apple I ate was poisonous. This bird was born because of its mother. No matter if one bird came from an egg and one bird was born alive and the next bird was also born alive, but all out of her mouth, they still don't plop up out of nowhere. They still have a cause. Now the thing here is that we automatically assume to not live in such a nature. Like the natural scientist, in his observations, in his research, in his experiments, will assume that nature is purposive, that it is not just somehow causal in general, but with different causes all the time that we can't make sense of, but rather that there are also general rules of that causality, that there are observable natural laws. If he finds a new stone that seems to be like a stone he knows, like granite or basalt, he will also immediately, without having tested it in each individual case, assume that it has the same properties, that it reacts in the same ways. Or if he meets a new human being, he will assume that this human has the same anatomy, more or less, as all the others. He will assume that the heart is in the chest and not in the head, and the brain is in the head and not in the chest. But why? Why does he assume that? Well, Kant calls this, let's say, phenomenon the technique of nature, which he says is a concept of reflection we have and we need. So technique of nature, you must be careful here, because the meaning of the word technique may have shifted a bit. Nowadays, we may associate it more with technology, with machines, but that was not a connotation that existed back in Kant's days. When he uses this word, he means it in the more original sense, because in the ancient Greek, techne is just their word for art, like art or craftsmanship. So technique of nature means that nature appears to us like a work of art. Again, it appears as if it was created by an intellect with a purpose, according to rules that make sense and that we can find and make sense of. Now, this concept of a technique of nature making sense, so to say, or this concept of a purposiveness, this is a concept, once again, of our reflecting power of judgment, and it is an a priori concept. It's not a concept we find in nature, in experience, and take out of experience, but rather it is a concept that we bring into experience. We start out with this concept. It is sort of an assumption or a proposition that we make a priori before even going into nature and starting to reflect about it. The natural scientist makes it, but even the common person, even the primitive person, like in the Stone Age, when we look around in nature, we assume that nature is purposive. And we need to assume this to make any sort of experience. Like, if I didn't assume this, I could not know that one time I could swim in water. So one time the water carried me and I didn't sink to the ground. Well, now I will assume that next time I will also be able to swim in the water. Nothing really tells me that this must be the case, but I will automatically assume this. Or if one time I found that a bird laid an egg and another bird came out of that egg, I will assume that this bird or that this whole species of birds always reproduce like that. I will not assume that next time this bird has children, they will not come out of eggs. If I didn't go into nature with that assumption, then I could not really make experience. I could also not seek experience. I could not try to observe the rules of nature. I could not try to find them through experiments. Rather, I could just blindly stumble around in nature, never sure that what I observed once will happen the same way next time I observe things. So, therefore, this is something that is not empirical, this assumption that nature has its own sort of technique, its own sort of artfulness, but rather it is a transcendental assumption. Transcendental as always, meaning it is about the condition of the possibility of experience. Empirical would mean it is something that I have taken out of experience, but rather it is the other way around. I got this a priori, not from experience, but before experience. And more than that, it is transcendental because I need it as a condition for experience even being possible. What is important, however, is Kant says that this transcendental assumption about nature having this technique is a subjective transcendental condition, not an objective one. Now, the categories of the intellect, they are objective. So I can say that nature must follow these categories. Nature must follow causality, for example. Because if it didn't, it couldn't appear to me at all. these categories are my only ways of thinking, my only ways of having representations. So if something is to appear to me, if something is to be a representation in my consciousness, it must be under these categories. That is why the intellect's categories, why they are transcendental concepts that are constitutive to our experience. Now, this transcendental assumption of the technique of nature that our reflecting power of judgment brings, that Kant says is not constitutive, but rather it is regulative. So it regulates how we approach nature and how we should approach nature. The common person and also the natural scientist, and how we have to approach nature if we ever want to make experience, if we ever want to make sense of it. But this does not mean that nature itself must necessarily work this way. This does not mean this technique of nature or this purposiveness we find in nature must be everywhere in nature. There could be this chaos that we can't make sense of. But we go into nature always with the a priori assumption that there won't be this chaos, that there will be something purposeful that we can make sense of. And here, as an aside, I will add that I find this interesting in light of the current modern developments in physics. Of course, Kant could not know there would be such a thing as quantum physics, but I wonder what he would have said about it. And I often find it sad that if we go into that realm of quantum physics, then there are no real laws of nature, or there is no causality. I've also found people using that as an argument against Kant, saying, oh, Kant must have been wrong with his transcendental philosophy and his table of categories. It is not the case that all of nature must be under those categories, must be causal, for example. But I wonder if that is correct. I mean, of course, I'm only a lay person. I'm not an expert in quantum physics, and I don't like going out of my expertise. But I assume that if there really was no causality at all in the quantum realm, then we also couldn't say anything about it at all. And then we also couldn't use it for our purposes. But of course it is being used. There are quantum computers being built. And if there was no causality there at all, then I don't see how that could work. Then you would have a computer, and in one moment you would press a key and it would produce A, and in another moment you would press the same key but it would randomly produce B. And in the third moment you would press the same key and the whole computer would vanish. But that is obviously not what's happening. So it seems to me that there is some sort of causality in place. Just we don't really fully understand that causality. I mean, I don't see how you could ever disprove causality anyways, how you could ever prove that there's no causality, that something happens without a cause. Because you can never prove that something is not. You can never prove the non-existence of something. So at most, we could only say that we can't find a cause for this happening. But that couldn't prove that there is no cause for sure. So I wonder if maybe Kant would say, if he knew about this, that here, when it comes to the realm of quantum physics, this is not where causality ends, because causality can never end in the realm of the sensual, in the realm of appearance. Because if something was without cause, it could not appear to me at all. But maybe he would say that this is a realm below the technique of nature. Maybe he would say that, okay, apparently only the realm of our usual everyday experience follows this purposiveness, this technique of nature. And if we go further below that, we get eventually to a level where the rules of causality are so manifold or so random, so chaotic, that we can't make sense of them, that we, in reflecting about them, can't find general rules under which they operate. But anyways, that's just an aside thought. I want to finish this up with mentioning that the reflecting power of judgment can, according to Kant, reflect in two different ways. It can be the aesthetic reflecting power of judgment or the teleological reflecting power of judgment. I don't want to get into those in this lecture, however, because they both have their own place in Kant's philosophy. The aesthetic power of judgment is judging the purposiveness of something in relation to us, to our own mind, and it deals with the beautiful and the sublime. So I will talk about that when I get to this part of Kant's philosophy. And the teleological power of judgment judges about objective purposes in nature, specifically in organic beings. Do they have a purpose? Were they created with a purpose? And this I will talk about when I get to Kant's natural science, his dealing with natural science and his opinions on biology. Here I just wanted to mention those. Now, this was me talking in general about the power of judgment and its two parts, the determining and the reflecting power of judgment. Now, as I said, the reflecting power of judgment may work on its own and even have its own concept a priori, the concept of purposiveness. But the determining power of judgment works under the direction of the intellect or of reason, and it just applies their concepts, their rules. It just determines the individual sensual cases according to their rules. Well, in the previous few lectures, I talked about the intellect and its rules, and I talked about the table of categories, about the 12 pure intellectual concepts, the 12 categories that we don't take out of experience, but we give to experience, and thereby only make experience possible. This should lead to the question how exactly the determining power of judgment applies the categories to sensuality, to experience. And this is what I want to talk about next. This leads me to talking about what Kant calls the schematism and what he calls the principles in his critique of pure reason. Because this is how the determining judgment connects the pure intellectual concepts to the non-intellectual, to the sensual. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Christos Pai, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, as well as to all others who support me and my aufklären cause.